Hi, I'm Emily Stimac and I'm from the Thyme Garden. We are located in Alsea and I am here to talk about propagating herbs with you guys today. How many of you are master gardeners officially? So hopefully I'll be able to come up with some interesting material that you haven't heard before. If not, just enjoy being here with fellow gardeners who like herbs. What I'm going to present today will be focused on how we do things at the Thyme Garden, and it's not an exclusive answer to your needs. It's definitely just the way we do it and the way we've learned to do it over the last 35 years. So I got my start at the Thyme Garden when my parents actually started the company. So in the 80s, they actually had a restaurant in Alsea called the Thyme Garden, and called the Farmer's Kitchen. And I have to mention it because Cheryl loved it. It's the best restaurant ever. But after running that restaurant for around 8 years, my parents were so burnt out that they had to sell it and started the Thyme Garden at that time. During the time at the Farmer's Kitchen, they had started growing culinary herbs to use in their cooking, and which led to collecting the seeds, which led to starting actually a mail order company for seeds. And so we got our start really, I don't know how we managed to get people to do this, but they would mail in $1.50 check or money order to us, and we would mail those catalogs all over the country, sometimes out of the country too. So this is our catalog today. So it's 35 years later. But originally we had them printed here, I think right down the road I can't remember what the printer is called now. But we would get them and we had a little collator machine sort of setup that my dad made, which is really just some files like this. And we had to walk around the table putting page 1 in and then page 2. So anyway, that's kind of how we got our start. And 2 years ago, my sister and I agreed to actually take the company over so my parents could enjoy some retirement time. They're still on the property and they still love to give us lots of helpful hints and those sorts of things, and participate when they want to. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Now I get to skip 2 slides, I think. So here I am. Most of my job actually involves cooking. So at the Thyme Garden, we do the seeds, as I mentioned. We start plants and have those for sale at the nursery. Then we also do events and tours and lunches. So during the summer, you can come out between June and August, and we have these tours that last an hour and a half of our garden. And then we do a 4-course lunch after that. And so mostly my job is cooking. My career has mostly been in the food industry. And my sister is more of the garden person, greenhouse manager and tour leader. But you can see by these pictures that I have been in the greenhouse before and also watered plants. So here's my whole family and also a picture of the garden. So my dad built the garden. It's 90 raised beds, and they all kind of have a focus in the different areas of the garden. There's the area dedicated just to the thyme, which of course we had to do because we're the Thyme Garden. But we also have one that's dedicated to edible flowers, and we use those a lot in our cooking during the summer and for garnishing and all that stuff. Then we have a medicinal plant area, culinary, and then one that's been really more and more popular in recent times is the dye and fiber garden. And so that's a really fun one to explore for different natural dyes and things. So for propagating herbs, I figured for a start, we would just kind of figure out what the definition of propagation is. And so it's really just the idea that you're creating a new plant from seed or cutting. And so we'll talk about the different techniques that you can use for that. And then we'll look at some specific varieties of herbs that and I'll make some recommendations for how you would propagate those. So the building blocks of propagation, no matter what, no matter if it's a seed or a cutting or something else, there's definitely crucial elements that you're going to want to cultivate for your plant. So the temperature, light, soil, moisture, and then the material itself are really, really important. So we'll go over some of that. Here's an example of the little seedling bed we keep. It's got a layer of warm coils, some sand, and then we put the seed trays in there. We cover it with a little plastic cover, and then it gets light. And we keep the light as close as possible, so around 6 to 8 inches. And then we mist that every day. So those are the elements for seed starting that, we're kind of got all those things in our ideal location for seeds. And I'm not going to go really deep into seeds because just last month we did a super deep seed presentation. So hopefully I can answer your questions if you have any specific seed questions, but we'll talk mostly about doing plants cuttings today. So one of the most important elements is going to be your soil. So I've got 3 different examples of soil up here that I brought. And you can really see the difference. So the seedling mix is going to be a nice, fine, very peaty mix with just the tiniest little bit of perlite in there. And this just creates that nice, like, comfy bed for your seed to land in. If you could imagine a tiny, tiny seed, microscopic, trying to like get things worked out in something like rough like this, it's not going to do well. It's going to get buried. It's going to try to make it to the light and just never get there. And then again, this is just a little bit more on the chunky side. So what you're looking for in your soil is going to be this nice, like, fine soil. But yeah, then the second example here is just a mix with 50-50. So we've got perlite and then the seedling mix. And this is the one that we use when we do our cuttings. And that just helps with good drainage because you really don't want your cuttings to be getting super damp. That'll cause them to rot. Okay. So the components for seed, we'll just go over this real briefly. So each seed kind of has its own different requirements that it likes. And so what I usually recommend for folks whenever they receive their seeds, either from a friend or maybe like from an order, is to go ahead and look at the back of the seed pack or inside it, wherever you find the directions, and figure out what that seed specifically needs to be started, and then make a calendar for those things. So a lot of seeds will say plant indoors 6 weeks before danger of last frost, or those sorts of things. So what you're going to want to do is get your seeds all together and group them by when they need to be started. And maybe you even have a diary that you keep, and you know that February 15th is the day that you're going to start this thing. And then you can make notes as you go throughout the years. And if that was too early, then you're going to start it a couple of weeks later the next year. There's other seeds that require cold stratification. And so those you're going to want to put outside or in a refrigerator with a little bit of like a moist paper towel. And then you'll mark your calendar for the amount of time that they require. A lot of times it will say for 1 week, 4 weeks, etc. At the Thyme Garden, we simply put some of the soil mix, probably that, because I told you we should, in one of these like larger plug trays, and we cover it with some mesh and we set it outside and kind of just let nature do the cold stratification for us. So another thing that you'll look at when you're starting your seeds will be the depth. So some seeds, it usually relates to how big they are. So for example, here's some cilantro seed. This one would say plant 1/4 inch deep. It's usually just about double what the seed like diameter would be. So for cilantro and other things that are kind of those simple to plant annual type varieties, I usually just start it right into a pot, or you could direct sow it. And you put some soil in your pot and kind of like press it gently, not too hard. You don't want it to be really compacted. And then you're just gonna make a little divot with your finger. And we usually go ahead and plant like kind of 4 groupings in each pot. And then we put 5 seeds in each one of those holes. And each of the seeds, they kind of have, whoops, they're kind of all over now. We keep our seeds in boxes. I think bags are a little hard to deal with here. especially in front of an audience. All right, so you've got your 5 seeds, and then you just real gently cover those up. And this is another thing that we like to cover with a fine like metal mesh, because little critters in your growing space may think that you actually made a snack for them. So we've got that. And then you're just gonna mist that in really gently. And the reason you don't spray it with like hard water is that that's gonna disturb all the soil, and your seeds, which are really dry, will end up floating up to the top. So you don't wanna do that. If your seed is one of the ones that says more like this plant can be difficult to germinate, like plant indoors, then you're going to probably want to go with one of the seed trays like this, or some other type of thing. You could definitely just use an egg carton or something like that, but for our purposes, we usually use these. Of course, we're growing 10,000 plants, so it's a little different. But for this one, what you're going to do is go ahead and take your seedling mix here, and you'll just go ahead and kind of sprinkle it over the top until you have it all nice and filled up. And you kind of just press it. Any little lumps, they get pressed down. This is actually a really fun thing to do. It's quite satisfying. ASMR or something like that. So you've got that. Say it went all the way to the edges, which I'm not going to do for this particular moment. Then I brought 2 because what we like to do is use the second tray for a little like kind of tamper downer. So what you'll do is you'll make sure they're all full and even. And then you're just going to take the second one. My workspace is a little small here. And then you just take the second one and line up the bottoms with the tops here. And that kind of just presses it evenly in and gets you a nice like even surface. It'll also let you know if there's any that are really low or missing soil and need some. And that just kind of gets your space ready for your soil or for your seeds. Yep. And then to plant the seeds, the very first thing you're going to want to do is make your labels. So you can use popsicle sticks, old labels that you've kind of crossed off the old one. We usually cut them down to a nice like small size so they're not sticking up all wonky in here. And then you're going to want to make sure you use a pencil instead of a pen, because pen doesn't really stick to that plastic super well, and nothing is worse than forgetting or not being able to tell what it is that you have here, especially if you've got a bunch of different stages or something. Another bit of advice, let's see, I think it might be on the next one. No, it's not. I'll get to it later. Yeah, is that, so say we were planting a whole bunch of different types of basil here. One tip is to alternate the colors. So if you were doing a lemon basil and then a Genovese and say amethyst or like another purple variety, if you go lemon, purple, green, it'll help you figure out like where things are at in here in the event that someone comes by and steals your tag or whatever. Yeah, it just is one of those little fail safes that we have found really helps. Yep. So for the seeds, one of the things that I hear quite often at the farmer's market booth when I'm there is that people think that they cannot grow dill or they can't grow cilantro. And the truth is that dill and cilantro are just things that you have to continuously plant. So you're not doing anything wrong if your cilantro goes to seed, because that's what it does no matter what, basically. So what I recommend is every 3 to 4 weeks, go ahead and sow some more, and then you'll just have that continuous supply. As you keep an eye on your little seedlings after they've been under the light, they've been misted every day, they start to get their first true leaves, which are the little tiny leaves that come out after these ones. Then you're going to be ready to go ahead and pot them up into a bigger pot. These ones, I would say, I wouldn't want to put these directly outside. So I think what you're going to want to do is kind of keep sizing them up. And again, our experience is very different than a home gardener's experience because our goal is to have lots of plants for people to buy. So maybe your technique varies a little bit depending because you're a home gardener. But yeah, so you'll take maybe the end of a pencil or something else. The soil is going to be quite solid by that time because it'll be held together by the roots. And you'll just pop the little tip of the pencil right in there, loosen them all up, and then you can grab them. Usually people grab them by the stem. The one exception to that would be that the sage family is very sensitive in their stems. So at that point you can use the leaf, or we have a really cool pair of like kind of pinchers that we use for that. And you will go ahead and you have your pots already. You can also have kind of a little tool to like make a hole in the middle of the pot. My dad loves to work with wood, so we have these nice little like wooden carved like plug things, but I'm sure you can find something around your house to use as an alternative. Maybe in the kitchen drawers. I think there's probably a good tool there. Yep, and then you'll have your holes ready and you'll label the flat right away before you put anything in it, just to make sure. And you might want to devise a sort of system for labeling. Like for us, we put the first label in the front, or sorry, in the back left corner. And then it goes the same thing, same thing, same thing until the next one. You know, so if you have that system, if it's going from the left back or whatever, however it makes you happy in your garden, I would recommend having a system like that so you know how to read your labels and follow it. That's also a good step. So you'll transfer those all to their soil and then you'll just gently kind of massage the soil so that it's all nestled around that plug. And we like to water our plants in with a B12 and water combination, so like B vitamins. We use, for a 5-gallon bucket, we use a half a cup. So that's kind of a general guide for that. And the B12 is just supposed to help de-stress the plants as they transition. You're still going to want to keep them indoors or in a sheltered area because they're very small and fragile. And then once they're ready to be planted outside, you'll want to harden them off by moving them outside for a little bit of time during the day or to a sheltered area slowly for about, say, 4 to 5 days. And then you can go ahead and plant them out. I like to make sure that the weather isn't going to be doing something super crazy. It's always good to make sure that there's not like an insane heat wave coming when you're thinking about planting your plants out, you know, because it's a very difficult time for them. All right, so moving on to the next phase, the starting a plant from cutting. This is done when you have a plant that maybe doesn't produce seeds in your area, or maybe it's a plant that is a cultivar that has properties that you really want to keep, but the seeds themselves would not be true to that plant. So some examples are like a geranium. There's rosemary. Like rosemary would be very hard to get a seed that would be true to the particular variety. And so rosemary is generally done by cutting. And those sorts of things, lavender. So different techniques would be rooting in water, and those would be the types of plants that you could do that with, would be like the more fleshy type of stemmed plants. And then the cuttings in soil is probably the most common and reliable way to do it. And then lastly, layering, and that's for things that really do root easily, but are maybe more low growing or maybe a different plant structure that wouldn't really lend itself to a cutting. You guys are good listeners. Does anyone have questions so far? No? Okay. All right. So for rooting in water, oh, yes.
What's the recommended, what you call it, mixture for cuttings?
Yeah, so the question was, what do you recommend to use for cuttings, like soil mix? And what we do is take the seedling mix and we mix it 50-50 with perlite. Yeah, and you can get seedling mix. We get it from a place called Growers Nursery. It's just north of Salem, Kaiser. And they also have big bags of perlite. And they're kind of industrial size, but there's enough gardeners in here. I think you guys could probably go through it. So one of the things that I actually started rooting in the method of rooting in water is lemongrass. And we used to buy lemongrass from a place up in Canada, actually, and we would get plugs, but they were shipped here, and I didn't really like the quality. And so one day I noticed that like the lemongrass that I get from the market, the like Asian market, had like just obvious root nodes in it. And so I decided to try this experiment, and I got a whole bunch of it. Well, I got a few at first, actually. I didn't go all in. And I added a willow stick to kind of have that chemical. I forgot what it is right now. And then I just have a very small amount of water in the bottom, which I monitor to make sure it doesn't dry out. And I also cut with a very sharp blade the lower few like outside levels to expose the stem. And when you look at it, you'll see like these little tiny nodes that are the future roots. I really love this knife that I got because it's super sharp and it has like an easily replaceable blade. So you want a nice sharp knife like that, and you just kind of lightly cut it around the base of each of those like portions of the stem. This is also really good for doing cuttings too, which I'll get to in a minute. Another plant I should point out that does pretty well with this would be basil. So I heard at the last presentation we did that people like to just go ahead and start their basil, like if they get it from the store, they put it in a little water. And that definitely speaks to the whole like fleshy herb sort of like starting in water option. Mint is another one. If you ever have like a few extra sprigs of mint from something and you put it in a jar of water on the counter, you'll see some roots pretty fast. And oregano is the same. So all of those like kind of just softer stemmed type of varieties can root this way. One of the reasons that we don't prefer this generally is that it does leave the roots quite exposed. And so if you want to have the most healthy life of the plant, it's probably better to just go ahead and do a soil cutting, because that way the plant is growing the roots right into the soil. They're protected and they're doing what they need to be doing and getting nutrients right away versus the water. So water is like a countertop solution, maybe when you don't have a seedling tray, or a cutting tray, but ideally when you're going to want to have soil for the most healthy start. Yes.
What's been your experience using willow bark? How more quickly or more robustly the roots form?
I feel like I noticed quite a difference. Maybe 1 or 2 weeks, but I'm not super scientific. So the question was how much faster did the roots start with the willow technique? I know, yeah, I thought it was good. Yes.
Do you use root stimulator?
We do for the cuttings, yeah. So just a basic like rooting powder sort of thing. But again, my preference is to always try to use something natural, like straight off of the earth if I could. So that's why I like the willow. Yes.
Does cinnamon actually promote root stimulation? I've heard that you can use cinnamon in lieu of the willows.
I haven't heard that. She was wondering if she's heard that cinnamon could potentially stimulate the root growth. Has anyone tried that? Well, it's worth trying. Yes.
The root powder, to use that whether it's dirt or water?
The only thing we really do in this technique is the lemongrass, and I've just used the willow so far with it. Everything else we do cuttings and we use this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Alrighty. So the next thing we'll talk about, getting to the next step. So after the roots have formed, and I do check them regularly, and once they've got like a good amount of root at the bottom, then I go ahead and pot them up into a pot. I usually, for lemongrass, because it has very, very deep roots, I usually use like a 7-inch like deep pot. I don't know what they're called exactly. And then you kind of want to just bury it enough so that like the top part of the grassy area, like the grass start, whatever you call that, is at the surface. And so then I do secure it with some kind of skewers. So I found like the jumbo skewers, these work pretty well. And then a little bit of kind of some florist sort of material here. So that's one technique. And again, it's really simple, and especially if you have like extra basil, you could try it. But then you are going to want to get that plant into some soil so it can have some nutrients. So yeah, then cutting in soil. So the components that you're going to want to include here will be starting with a nice healthy material. You're going to cut that stem at a 45-degree angle, and that helps again to promote the root growth, and also it helps to get the cutting right into it. Let's see, remove flowers. So ideally you will avoid a cutting like this where it's in flower. And that's because the plant isn't thinking about making roots at all right now. It's thinking about flowering. And so it's going to be an extra challenge to get it to want to make the roots. Let's see, other things that you want to look for, especially with rosemary, it's great to have that like nice, fresh green stem. And so if you're like kind of looking at your plant and keeping, kind of looking at the whole shape of it, keep in mind that what you're going to want that will be the most success is the nice, like fresh new growth. You can definitely do it from an older part of the plant. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging. So let's see. We'll get into those mechanics, right? Another thing, like say you're out pruning your plant and you're like, well, I think I could use a few more rosemary around. Just take this whole thing, but what you are going to want, oh, sorry. Do you have a question?
Yes. What's the best time to take cuttings from rosemary, like during the year?
Well, we like to do our rosemary cuttings in November or December, and that's because where we are in LC especially, ends up being like quite a bit of ice and weather damage. So, and also we want to get our cuttings to like a good size by the time, our nursery opens. You can probably do it any number, anytime really, but just monitoring your plant and looking for that like nice, like fresh growth. For example, right now, and I did actually bring this one. This is like, I think the perfect cutting. Try that. Just check that out. And then here's one that you wouldn't use. Maybe it's too confusing to have two going around. The flowering one is what I would not use, and the non-flowering is a good one. So then when you're getting ready to do your cutting, you'll go get your plant material. We like to make sure that we have a good plan for getting those cuttings done right away. You don't want your cutting to be sitting around. You don't want it to get hot, so you want it to be cool and moist. I mean, a rainy day is kind of the ideal sort of time. Before I even go out and get my plant material, I actually get my plug tray ready. So again, just kind of like sprinkle this over. I don't know if I brought enough for a full tray, but you want to make sure it goes all the way out to the edges. So you're going to maybe just pile a whole bunch on and then just push it out to the edges. And then with another tray, kind of go over it and press down gently. And that just kind of helps get rid of any little like pockets that may have formed. Okay, so let's see. We didn't make too much of a mess last time we were here, but this could be a different story. All right, you can also tap it just a little bit, which again, this is very difficult workspace, but tapping it. You've got your soil in there, you feel happy, you feel like they're all pretty well even. You definitely don't want a big airspace in there because the roots will die if they're exposed to the air. So you've got your again, we call this the cutting mix, and it's half seedling and half perlite. And then we put it down on the floor of the greenhouse, and we mist it with a little bit of water just to start to pre-moisten it, because you don't want to try to stick your cutting into a dry dirt. Like, as I said, it needs to stay moist. Okay, so we've got our thing ready. We're gonna pretend like we misted it. Then we go out and we get our cuttings. We want to make sure that, again, that we are labeling them right away. And then I go ahead and just get started by taking, say, I'm doing 72 common rosemary. So I get 72 ideal little starters here. And then to remove the bottom, the leaves from the bottom part of the stem, I like to use cuticle scissors because they're just really nice, like fine and usually really pretty sharp. When I take the cutting from the main plant, I go ahead and start with that 45-degree angle. But if I look at it in the greenhouse and say, well, that's too long, I can't, like, you don't want that to try to like be like living in your little plug tray. So you're gonna shorten it to maybe about 4 inches. Cut it on that 45-degree angle. And then you gently remove the bottom, say like 2 sets of leaves. And so you have something like this.
To strip,
Hmm?
better to cut than strip.
Yeah, absolutely. You want a nice, like, you want a nice clean cut there, and the stripping it will damage the stems, and that can, you know, make it more susceptible to different fungus or different things in the soil, infections basically for your plant. So you've got these, you have a whole bunch of them, you're ready to go. Then what we do is take just a little bit of the rooting powder out and we put it in a small container. This is like some kind of Tupperware shot glass from the 70s, I think. If you can find one of those, you'll really be pro. Okay, and then I just kind of put it to the side and I just give it a little like sort of sweep through it. And then I pop it in here. Pop.
Do you dampen that before you?
This would be damp because before we even go out to get our cuttings, we're gonna moisten it. So yes, moist, not that, nope. We haven't found that we needed to do that. It seems to like cling to it pretty well.
Emily, do you use the other part of the rosemary you just cut?
No, don't.
Emily,
It gets composted for future plants.
could you repeat the question?
Okay, the question was, do you reuse the parts that you cut off, you know, the kind of excess materials? You certainly could if you had a shortage, and we have. And one thing that might be interesting about the cutting, if you did it this way, well, obviously you want to make sure that you still have it upright. Okay, that's crucial. You can't plant it upside down. Nothing will happen. But for this one, because we've already taken off that terminal bud, it's going to put out more like side branches. So it'll have a different growth pattern right away. And so we could do that, for example. Yes.
Have you ever promoted more root growth by trimming some of the foliage? Like snipping some of the leaves, especially on the softer cuttings, like cutting back, you know, just sharply cutting back some of the leaves to kind of promote even more root growth?
At what stage? She's wondering if
When you stick them during this process?
yeah, we're pretty strict about how big they are to start with. We don't want them to be really big because the plant doesn't have roots at all. So it doesn't have the ability to get the nutrients that it needs. So you really do want it to be as small as possible without being too small. And so, for example, this one, it has 2 sets of leaves now. And then it has 2 leaf brackets, I guess I want to say, that have been trimmed and a 45-degree angle. And then I put it in here with my root tone, just kind of scoop it up. And then I give it a little tap like I'm a cigarette smoker. And I pop it right in there. Like that. Okay, so that's the example of the basic ideas, and you're very good question. We don't want it to be too big. Yes.
How do you bury the stem in the soil?
Yeah, so I would say, getting back to that, maybe like 3/4 of an inch. You definitely don't want any of the leaves into the soil either. That'll cause it to rot, and any rot is gonna be a real problem. Like the mold and stuff will cause big trouble for you. So you want the stem only in the soil. And you guys are welcome after we're done to come up and check out the examples up here. Keep in mind that it would be moist soil. So then you're gonna check the cuttings. Once you've got them, you'll keep them moist, but not too wet. And then again, we use like a bottom heat sort of system with like, ours is hot water, but you could use like a heating mat, nothing too hot. But that again will like kind of promote that warmth and that growth. You want them to have light, they need light, but not too much light. So for example, if we've just done some cuttings and they're in the greenhouse and the sun starts blaring and we know it's going to be like a hot flash, we'll put them underneath the benches to protect them from too much light because they'll just wither and be super unhappy. And then as you check them, you'll notice some of them will start getting the little roots ready to go. So then at that point, again, you're going to take your little plug that you have and just gently loosen it from the bottom. And then usually you can just kind of pop it up and put it into the next pot up. And then again, you'll water it in with the B vitamins and keep taking care of it. And eventually it'll be ready to go out into your garden. Yes.
If you are watering with willow water,
Mhm.
just having a root in the water itself,
Yeah.
is there a point at which that's no longer helpful?
Mm,
Would you just stop using the willow water after a while, or is that going to continue to be helpful?
I think once the plants is established, you could probably quit. Yeah. But I mean, it seems like willow water would be pretty easy and plentiful to have around. So I don't think it would hurt. Yeah. Yes.
What is willow water?
Okay, so that would be just kind of like a natural infusion of taking a big bucket and filling it up with willow sticks. And then the component in there, which I should have looked up the word because I keep forgetting it. But there's a component in willow that stimulates the root growth. It's probably the same as what's the concentrated in here. I'm sorry, I don't have that name for you guys. Okay. All right, so then the last technique that I'm going to talk about today is layering. Oh, sorry, yes.
For the home gardener, are there any herbs that can go right from that little size into the garden, or do you have to pop them up into 4-inch?
I think you're going to have the most success doing a kind of a gradual move, just because it's a big bad world out there. So part of it would be that your garden soil would be a lot rougher, I'm guessing, than like what our potting soil would be. The environment won't be as controlled, so there'll be a lot more extreme, like hot and cold, the moisture. So like all those things that the plant needs and when it's in that sort of tender form. The other aspect would be that it's going to be a big shock for your little guy to like go out of this plug in general. And so then to have to adjust to outdoor life at the same time might just be too much. So it might survive, but it might also just never really like thrive. And so you want to kind of create the best chances for success with that. So the last technique is what I call layering, and that's kind of what blackberries do, those little jerks, where they have their like stems coming out and then they lay on the ground and then a whole bunch of roots form and then you've got another problem in your yard. But the cool thing about it is that it works for other plants like thyme. So for example, this is what I would kind of consider an ideal sort of like piece of creeping thyme that I would use for a cutting. And so when I do that, it's basically just taking a portion of the plant, resting it on the soil, and then securing it so that the plant stem stays in contact with the soil. And you keep that moist and it will grow right in there. So what I do is we fill up our pots. We'll have a whole flat of pots and I'll get a whole bunch of cuttings from the yard. Again, we'll moisten this and make sure it's not too dry. And then you just make a little kind of like trough in the middle of your soil, the surface here. I think I brought, yes, okay. So this is no longer ideal because I actually picked it yesterday. But if you could imagine this lush piece of thyme here. I got this from the garden and already I can see that there was one part where the like roots already want to come out right there. This is obviously too big for my pot, so I could probably get 2 out of this. Prune off any like kind of weird dead stuff. And then you're gonna take and you're going to align the little trough that you made with the root stem and then nestle the soil back in there. And then the last aspect is kind of a bummer because I forgot to bring little stones. But what we do next is we just take some little stones like pebbles and we just put them on top of the plant. And that holds the stem down in contact with the soil. And after maybe 3 weeks, you'll have a new plant. So you just have to keep it moist though. And again, this is something where if you have just a few of them, maybe like put it under the bench when it gets really sunny because you don't want it to get super hot. If it dries out during the time when the new roots are growing, it probably will die. So sorry to talk about you like that. But yeah, so, and it also looks really beautiful, like a little Zen garden while you have your stones on there. You could like collect special stones even and put them on. So that's one technique we use for those low growing items. So that would be like special types of creeping thyme, Corsican mint, maybe different types of oregano even, where we are kind of dividing the plant, taking our really sharp knife out there, kind of looking for those areas where the plant is growing away from the space that you want it, or ideally over a rock sometimes, where it's easy to lift it up and just cut it off and then transfer it to the soil and hold it down with the rock. And oh, here's a great example of how you do it. So you made that little trough, you put your cutting in it, and then you kind of nestle the soil up to make sure it's in contact with the stem, and then you hold it down with stones. And just keep it moist, but not too wet, and you'll get a new plant from that. And we like to just check periodically and make sure that once the roots are done to take the stones off because the plant can't grow there where it's covered up with the stones. Okay, so there's some particular herbs that have like different types of needs, and so I thought I'd go over just a few of those most common ones now. So for basil, some of them are great to start from seeds, and that is because open pollinated basil is really going to be a gamble in terms of what you're going to get. So unless you are very careful about protecting your basil from other types of basil, it's going to be kind of hard to get a true seed from that. And so buying this particular types of seeds is probably going to be the most effective way to get a particular variety. So those types would be like the lemon, lime, cinnamon, the sacred basil. And again, I touched on this earlier, that it's helpful to put like different varieties alternating so that you can see where you're at really easily and what you had there. You can start from cutting. So if you have that basil plant and you want another one, you can cut it, remove the bottom leaves like we talked about so that there's just that stem there and put it in water. Or you could also put it in your tray here. And then there's one variety in particular that we do from cutting only, and that's an African blue basil. It's a tender perennial, but it's one that we keep alive in our greenhouse each year, and it's a really, really cool plant. There's probably others that are only by cutting, but I can only speak to what we have at the Thyme Garden in particular for that. Sages are another one that are kind of a variable. Oh, did I see a hand?
I say that, your mother told me about, the Vietnamese basil that she uses instead of cilantro,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
cilantro boats.
Yep. I was gonna bring one of those today and I didn't pack it. Yeah, so sage is another one that you can do some from seed or from cutting if you have a plant. It does pretty well. But for example, for cuttings, we don't have seeds for any of these varieties, so we just keep a stock plant and we do cuttings. We do them very similarly to this. So we'll have a sprig of the sage. We'll trim the leaves off the sides for the bottom section about an inch, and then we'll pop it with the root tone and pop it right into the thing. And those will also take pretty easily, like maybe 3 to 4 weeks, they should be ready for potting up. When you're starting your sage from seed, it's really good to have a nice warm seed bed area. They in particular, they really like worms, especially some of the more like desert varieties. They're also very sensitive to like dampening off too. So, and basil also, you just want to make sure that that they're not drying out, but that they're also not too moist. Sometimes a fan helps with that. Mint, we sell spearmint and peppermint, but I'm always mystified when people buy it because if you do decide to grow it from seed, you're going to have to cull out a lot of there's just some random like lower quality type of plants from that. So it's so easy to start from cutting. You can just basically look at it and it'll start growing, as you know, if you have it in your yard, right? Yeah, and then that it's a good example of one that there can be so many different varieties, lots of different spearmints and those sorts of things where you propagate just by cutting because they have that sweet flavor or like notes of grapefruit, variegation, all those sorts of things. So for our mint, what we usually do, we have them in pots and we'll keep them outside for most of the winter. And then when we're ready to do our cuttings, we bring them into the greenhouse, get them warm, and they just shoot right up. And then we can do the cuttings. Tarragon, there's a couple of varieties of tarragon that are available by seed. So Russian tarragon, which is a nice vigorous grower, but the flavor is a little bit flat. So it's not as popular for culinary uses, but it's still a valid plant. And then Mexican tarragon, which is actually in the marigold family, and it grows really well around here as a perennial. It comes back and forms this like kind of cute little shrub each year. So that one you can grow from seed. You could probably also do cutting with that too, but we don't usually. I don't know why. And then the other one, the other type of tarragon, which is the most commonly used in culinary purposes, would be the French tarragon, and that one is cultivated by a cutting. So what we usually do, again, is we have like our mother plants that we keep in the greenhouse, and then we do cuttings like all year for that. And they do really well for cuttings. And geraniums are, again, there's a few varieties that you can get online, mostly decorative that you can start from seed. But it's also a really easy one for cutting. So this is one I thought I would do an example for you guys. So we fill up our pot. If it has a really thin stem, we're going to use this, the cutting tray for it. But some of them are just so big, fat, and juicy that what we do is actually just go ahead and take it right off of the plant and stick it right in here. So all the rules are off. So what I do is I kind of look at the plant and I figure out what's going to be a good cutting and where can I take some off of the plant and still have a good looking plant or still have like an alive plant, basically. And then I'm going to take and try my best to get an angle, a 45-degree angle. Another thing you want to look out for is to make sure it's not blooming. If it is blooming and you have to do a cutting, just cut the blooms and the buds off. And then again, I'm just going to cut these big leaves off because that's going to be harder for the plant to support. So now I'm down to a little leaf, a big leaf, and then the stem. And then I just dip it in the root toner, tap it, and pop it right in here. And then you want to make sure that it's not so deep that the leaf where the leaves are coming out is going to be covered with soil because that'll make it mold. And then you'll water that in and just keep it moist and you'll have a new plant. That easy. That's our standard. I am not sure what would happen if it was in a colder environment. I would say cuttings in general, like keep them at least 50 degrees. 60 might be better, or between 50 and 60. Yep, and then thyme, there's quite a few varieties you can get of thyme that you can grow by seed, and it's a pretty easy one. It'll sprout really fast, and we do that in one of these like smaller plug trays because they're very small seeds, and so you want to try to get like just a couple in each one of those, and luckily that's my sister's job, so I don't have to have the dexterity. So you'll do that, and then when they get their mature leaves, you're going to pot them up into a larger pot, and then at some point you'll say, my plant's ready to go outside, and you'll take it outside. So yeah, these ones are all, you can get these by seed. But again, you're going to want to kind of like monitor it. If you have like 100 of them, maybe 20 aren't quite as good, just rip them out. Then special cultivars that are not available by seed, these ones are going to be done by cutting. Most of the time, because if you collected the seed, it would just be something random that grew, so you wouldn't be able to like really be sure that you're going to get what you wanted. For an upright thyme, it's usually a pretty challenging job to do the cuttings from upright thyme. This is a little section of Gray Hill thyme that I grabbed yesterday. But what I would do is just take and remove all the stems from the lower part carefully. And this might be a little bit too big. So what I would do, and it's not very alive right now. It doesn't help that everything got so frozen last week. But I'll do just what we were talking about with the rosemary, where I take a section of it and then I carefully remove the leaves from the bottom section. I have about 3/4 of an inch. Maybe I'll go a little bit more even. That. And then what I go ahead and do is I clump like 3 of these together. So get another one. It's not tedious at all. But yeah, one of the basic rules that we talked about is that you don't want too much plant material for the plant to have to try to support while it doesn't have roots. So a smaller cutting is generally bigger. It's really hard to process. I like to make big cuttings. My sister says no. So I'll do that. I'll prep like say 3, and then I just kind of like bundle them together like this. So that all the stems are together, put in some rooting, and then pop it in there.
So Emily, will you end up with 3 plants or just 1 plant?
Just one plant, but it'll just have like more of fullness to it. So it's kind of just a way of making it a little bit, like giving it more of a jump start for like a full good looking plant. And then
Ask you about thinning on the basils.
yeah, we do that. Again, I like to take my little tiny scissors and I usually use like a little Tupperware container, smaller than that. And I go and we reduce them to like 1 or 2 per pot. If you have any more than that, they compete for the nutrients in the soil, and they also tend to dampen off really easy if their stems are touching. But they make a great gourmet sort of like finish for your dinner that night. You can have basil shoes. So it's really a wonderful day when you get to do that. Okay. And then lavender, again, and you have 2 options for lavender. There's quite a few that are available by seed, and they're actually pretty easily started by seed also. One limitation, or maybe kind of like a test for your patients, would be that when they're started from seed, they tend to grow a lot slower. So for the first entire season of the plant, growing the plant from seed, it's probably only going to be like 3 inches by the end of the year. Whereas if you do a cutting, you'll probably have like maybe a 12-inch plant. So it goes a lot faster that way. So for lavender, again, we do the lavender about the same time as the rosemary, and mostly that's because we want to get the plant material while it's in good condition before like it goes through winter and dies off a whole lot. But if in the event that you wanted to do a cutting now, you could go out, check out your lavender plants, see where they need to get pruned. And then from that material, you can probably find some good stuff to make a cutting. So for example, I just brought this like random branch, but it's got some good stuff on it. So I'm gonna take and remove the area where I see that healthy, like new growth. And I'm gonna cut it at a 45-degree angle. And I'll prune off, oops, I'm using the wrong scissors. And I'll prune off again any leaves that are going to be going below the soil. And also this is where the roots are coming out. So as a general rule, I like to have 2 sets of leaf nodes. And then again, this is gonna be too long, so then I have to go back and actually prune this bottom one off. Like that, okay, so you've got some leaves and you've got your stem. Pop it in the root tone. And then don't worry a whole lot about getting it everywhere on the stem, because as you slide it into here, it's going, the hormone is going to just kind of like get carried up the stem. So you don't have to worry too much. And again, just try to make sure that you aren't burying where the leaves meet the stem. And then just nestle it in there real gently. So you've got a future lavender there. And you could do this there's a whole bunch more. We could do this. There's lots of future lavenders there. And you'll just, I try not to get the actual leaf material wet. So for the cuttings, what you're going to want to do is probably have like a pitcher with a kind of a finer spout, and try to just water it in from the sides and try not to get it wet, because the moisture one of your biggest, adversaries here will be rot. You don't want it to be getting rot and like too wet and rotting off, because then it's the compost pile. Yep, and then lastly, the rosemary sorry.
I take you back to lavender.
Yeah.
If you're shy of a lot of good new growth on a mother plant, how far can you kind of be successful getting into what's sort of semi-woody?
I would say that your percentage of like good cuttings will probably go down to like 30% maybe or something, versus like closer to 80 to 100. Yeah, so it definitely makes a difference, but it's worth trying, especially if you think that plant is going to have to be pulled out, but you want to keep it, trying to start the next generation. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So we've already done a couple of rosemary cuttings and talked about that. For some of them, like the Severn Seas or the Irene, it's more of a meandering kind of like semi-upright variety. That one's probably the most challenging to try to do a cutting with, because it's going to like tip over and be all like weird in your trays. So for that, you might want to try actually doing like a pot where you prune it, put it in here, and let it kind of like do its thing over the top. And the same with the creeping varieties. So just use a little bit bigger space to allow them, because of their weird shape. It doesn't really lend itself to this type of format. Okay, and I think that's all, and it's 1 o'clock. So here we go. On my last note, I just want you guys to all know you can come out and visit us at the Thyme Garden. We'll have lots of fun varieties. We're open April 15th to June daily. And then starting in June, we are open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And then we have some fun events. So our Earth Day event is April 19th, and then Art in the Garden is May 11th, 10th, and 11th. Yep.